Funding for nonprofits is changing. Community needs are growing, and NGOs are being asked to do more with less. Welcome to the Change Makers Junction, where ideas meet action. The podcast exploring how we can build sustainable organizations across Africa. Join us for this episode as we rethink the future of organizational sustainability. Hello and welcome to the Change Makers Junction. This is a space where we discuss civil society, its leadership, its posture, sustainability, and its importance. So today I'm joined by Dr. Tendai Murisa, who is the director of CVO Institute. Tendai, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Great. It's lovely to have you on a different topic, right? Well, it's not a different topic. Rather, it's a different focus, I would say.
I like the feel of this. I feel relaxed.
Very comfortable. Very comfortable indeed. So we are going to discuss sustainability, which is a core element of nonprofits, especially during this season. Doc, we're going to talk about sustainability and your thoughts around it and where civil society is, whether it's in Zimbabwe, it's in Africa. Where are we?
I think, and thanks for that. It's a very interesting moment for us because there are two tides that are coming towards civil society, and they are potentially storms. And depending on how we are prepared, they can knock us out. There's a storm around the legislative environment, the policies that governments are coming up with in terms of regulating the space, regulating civil society, and also limiting what they can do. So that's one aspect. Then the second aspect is around the changes to the funding landscape. Because for too long, civil society organizations across Africa, the majority of them were 100% dependent on funding. It could be project funding, it could be institutional funding, but all that, from what we are seeing in terms of just an analysis of the behaviors of ODA, the Overseas Development Aid actors, the closure of USAID, and also what we're seeing with the EU-based partners, etc., we're seeing a reduction, a significant reduction in terms of funding. So the question becomes, what becomes of organizations that had been formed and had become used to surviving on grants alone?
Right. And so the question becomes very important. If there's low funding, how do organizations who've literally lived on donor funding survive post this? The needs are growing, they're not getting any less, but here we are facing this challenge on how do we make sure that we can survive just to keep the organization running, but also meet the needs of our communities that we serve.
That is the huge contradiction, right, for us here, because as with global capitalism, the challenges post-COVID period and up until now, what we're seeing is actually a growing inequality. The rich are getting richer, they are fewer, they are the minority, and everyone else who's left behind is getting poorer. And we had come to a place whereby civil society organizations, NGOs, especially those in service delivery, were playing a growing role in terms of coming in and becoming a support for the last mile, a support for services to do with health, to do with education, and even responses to climate change. But now with the challenges to do with funding, it does not mean that community needs are decreasing. So I make this argument to say what we are going to be seeing right now is the clearing of the ground. Organizations that were holding spaces, but without a firm foundation, without being connected to communities, I think those ones are the ones that are going to close quicker than the ones that are actually within community. Because I use this analogy to say, who is going to mourn for you? So if you are thinking as a leader or as a team around adapting your strategy to survive in this period, the first question that you should put on your think board is to say, who will mourn for us if we're to die? If you cannot name or list constituencies of people who are benefiting from your work, you are most likely not aligned to the needs within that community. You are just floating. So I think many organizations have to go back to the bare bones and the basics to say, who do we really serve? Who do we really service? Which interests and who depends on our services? Because once you have that clarity, then it helps in terms of then realigning your strategy.
That's very interesting. Now that we've spoken about why NGOs are here, what is their relevance? And we've spoken about funding. We're moving forward to talk about the future. So what does it look like for these nonprofits that you've mentioned?
Well, look, I think first of all, let's agree on one thing. The so-called crisis is not new in many contexts. So the context that I'm in as a nonprofit leader in Zimbabwe, we've been in different types or different forms or peaks of a crisis. So funding crises have come and gone, but this one looks a bit more significant. Right. So I think we have developed muscle memory. We have developed sort of a framework around dealing with declines. These declines in funding, etc. So I think that's now what we're beginning to deploy to say, what exactly is it that we've done before when a tsunami hits us, when communities know what happens when a drought hits, etc., etc. So I think it's the same for nonprofit civil society organizations. If you've been in the space for that long enough, you know of moments where there was sort of challenges. But I think what is going to matter is language and also how we position ourselves. Because I think at the beginning of what we call the Zimbabwe crisis, post-2000, what we did as nonprofit actors was to accentuate the crisis and our victimhood. But we quickly realized that that does not help tell us a story, because the story is, what are you doing about the crisis? So that's the question you're asking, say, what is the future? So I think the first thing that we need to do is to rewrite the script. We rewrite the script about what we can do within the crisis and to rewrite the script around what we already have. So we're not just looking at the cup as half empty, we're looking at it as half full. So the moment we change that, we begin to say, what is it that is within our networks or within our organizations? So it's, others call it asset-based thinking, ABD, asset-based development. So when we begin to think about assets, we begin to realize that one of our soft assets is relationships, networks that we've established over years. So where we were working as silos, we may begin to say, maybe we need to share work. Where we were using offices without even computing to say, how much does a square meter of an office really cost? We begin to rethink that. Because COVID also taught us that we could work remotely. So those with buildings, they can look at those as different assets to say, how do I leverage or how do I make sure that this asset, which was just looking like a dead asset, becomes a liquid asset that we can use to begin to reinvest in a certain way. So I think the most important thing that is we'll have to change is the mindset of leaders in the nonprofit space, and also the mindsets of communities being serviced, to say it's no longer just about receiving, it's about co-creating and co-delivering.
Well, I think you've put that so well. And I think one of the takeaways I've gotten from that is around the mindset shift. I remember us having this conversation, but a little more in depth, when we were looking at the future NGO, the NGO of the future. And we spoke about a number of things that NGOs could do in order for them to survive. And so as we just kind of bring this to a close, what are the characteristics that you think an NGO should have if they're going to be an NGO of the future?
Yeah, it's I remember that series we did last year. I think they're not cast in stone, but can I use the term? I know it may be controversial. Entrepreneurialism within the organization, a value around spending less, not spending just because you got the money. A value around sharing work, not just trying to look for the glory, but beginning to say we're better off if we share the tasks with others. A value around being community-centric, thinking about who else is doing this kind of work that we're doing and how else can we connect with what they have already done, so that we avoid duplication, we avoid silos, we avoid the hyper-competitiveness that is in the space. So I think that's very necessary for us to rethink even our values in how we do our things, and also to begin to reduce the bureaucracy so that decisions can be made in real time. Because in many instances, in many organizations, the layers that we had created slow us down in terms of trying to respond to the crisis that we face. But also, and I hope we can be able to get a chance around this, to think beyond traditional funding models, to begin to think about how do we work alongside corporates, how do we work alongside communities, so that we just don't see communities as recipients of the work that we do, but as people who can actually potentially fund the work we do. So I think all that is challenging us to begin to say, many studies have shown us that there's a significant amount of resources in Africa. but we have not been tapping into that. But sustainability begins to challenge the kind of leader we need in a nonprofit. It's no longer just about your competence to write a fundraising proposal, but it's about something else, to begin to say, how else do you work in an environment of scarcity by connecting with others?
I love that. So if you're an NGO, maybe you want to start one, this conversation becomes very, very important for you. And we've mentioned a couple of things that you need to think about. The first one is, what do you have within? And the second thing would be, you need to change the way you think about your nonprofit. Have that entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah.
And then the last one, we were talking about the assets that you have, how you use the assets that you have. And so this is the Change Makers Junction. And we would love you to just continue watching us, following us, and you'll find a way to keep your organization afloat. Doc, any closing remarks as we go?
Yeah, you mentioned that if somebody is thinking of starting a nonprofit, what a bad time to think of that. But anyways, there's never a good time to start a nonprofit. So I think the idea behind Change Makers Junction is we're just taking what we've been writing. We keep a blog post on our Substack by the same title. So the idea is really to bring this to your room so that at least you can follow in terms of video, audio, etc. But it's just to build upon a body of knowledge around thinking through sustainability. We are still figuring it out as well. So there's no straight answer to say, follow this pathway. If you do 1, 2, and 3, you'll be sustainable. Context does matter, and we're going to be discussing context a lot in how we sort of navigate sustainability.
All right. Thank you, Doc. Thank you for joining the Changemakers Junction, and we will see you in our next episode. Goodbye for now. That's it for this episode of Changemakers Junction, where ideas meet action. For more sharp conversations on NGO sustainability and organizational resilience, subscribe to Changemakers Junction on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Share this episode, keep the conversation going, and join us next time as we turn ideas into action.